If I had $5,000 today and I was 30, this is where I'd put it and why. Because investing in 2025 looks completely different than it did even 5 years ago. The economy is shifting, interest rates are stabilizing, technology is exploding, and index funds are quietly becoming the most powerful wealth-building tool for ordinary people. So if you're in your early 30s, or honestly at any age, and you want a simple, low-maintenance strategy that can actually grow into something meaningful, here are the 5 ETFs I'd pick if I were starting from scratch today. Let's start with the backbone of almost any smart portfolio in 2025, a broad market index ETF. For me, that's VTI, the Vanguard Total Stock Market ETF. And the reason is simple. At 30, the biggest advantage you have isn't money, it's time. VTI gives you ownership in thousands of U.S. companies from every major sector. It's diversified, low cost, and historically it has captured almost the entire growth of the American stock market. If I were 30, I'd want something boring, steady, and proven as my foundation. Even when the market dips, which it absolutely will, VTI has a track record of coming back stronger. That's why the first chunk of my $5,000 would go straight into this ETF. It's the closest thing to set it and forget it investing that still builds wealth. After establishing that base, the next ETF I'd add is one that specifically targets innovation and long-term disruption, but without the extreme volatility of individual stock picking. That's QQQ, the Nasdaq 100 ETF. QQQ gives you exposure to the biggest tech-driven companies in America, names that have shaped the last decade and will likely shape the next one. Think cloud computing, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and digital payments. If you believe technology is still in the early stages of transforming everything, from how we work to how we consume information, QQQ lets you ride that wave without gambling on single companies. At age 30, you can afford volatility. In fact, you want it, because you have the time for those volatile periods to turn into long-term growth. QQQ has historically outperformed most major indexes during long bull markets and remains one of the strongest growth ETFs available. Now, even with strong U.S. exposure, a complete portfolio in 2025 shouldn't ignore the rest of the world. And that's where ETF number 3 comes in, VXUS, the Vanguard Total International Stock ETF. Here's why this matters. The U.S. isn't the only engine of global growth anymore. Emerging markets, European companies, and Asian tech firms are expanding rapidly, and owning international stocks gives you access to opportunities you simply won't get with domestic-only ETFs. VXUS diversifies across more than 40 countries. At 30, this global mix helps you avoid being tied to the fate of a single economy. If the U.S. slows down for a few years, which is absolutely possible, international markets can balance things out. And the reverse is true as well. Not to mention, VXUS has historically traded at lower valuations, which means you often get more global diversification at a discount. So at this point, we have broad U.S. exposure, tech-driven growth, and global diversification. Now we add something specifically built for stability and risk control, BND, the Vanguard Total Bond Market ETF. At 30, you don't need a huge allocation to bonds. But having at least some exposure helps protect you from market downturns and reduces volatility, especially if you're planning major life steps, buying a home, starting a family, or just wanting a bit more balance. Bonds aren't exciting, they don't dominate headlines, and they won't make you rich overnight. But they do something far more important. They smooth out the ride. BND gives you a mix of government and corporate bonds with low fees, and it works as the defensive anchor of the portfolio. The goal isn't to chase returns here, it's to create resilience. And that brings us to ETF number 5, the one that adds a future-focused, high-potential layer to the whole strategy. For this, I'd pick SMH, the VanEck Semiconductor ETF. If there's one industry that will define the next 10 years, it's semiconductors. AI, electric vehicles, robotics, cloud computing, biotech. None of these can grow without chips. Chips are the new oil. They power everything. SMH gives you exposure to leading companies in the semiconductor world, including the giants of chip design, manufacturing, and fabrication. Now, SMH is more volatile than the other ETFs in this list, but that's exactly why I'd include it at age 30. You want a slice of high-growth industries that are only getting bigger. And right now, semiconductors are at the center of global competition, innovation, and investment. If I had $5,000 and I was building my portfolio from scratch, this is the ETF I'd use to capture that long-term upside. So let's break this down into a simple allocation. If I had $5,000, here's how I'd divide it. I'd put 40% into VTI because it gives me broad exposure to the entire US market. Then I'd put 25% into QQQ for long-term tech growth. 15% would go into VXUS for global diversification. 10% goes into BND for stability. And the last 10% goes into SMH for future-focused upside. Of course, this doesn't have to be your exact allocation, but it gives you a simple, balanced, beginner-friendly structure that covers growth, diversification, and stability without overcomplicating anything. And here's the truth most people overlook at 30. You don't have to pick the perfect ETF. You just need to start. Your biggest advantage is how many decades you still have left for compound growth to do the heavy lifting. Even small contributions, invested consistently, can snowball into life-changing amounts. The mistake most people make is waiting. They try to time the market, or they overthink which ETF is the absolute best. Meanwhile, years pass and nothing gets invested. Starting today matters far more than finding something perfect. And if all of this still feels overwhelming, remember this. You don't need to watch the market every day. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need to pick individual stocks. You just need a simple plan, low-cost ETFs, and consistency. These 5 ETFs give you exposure to thousands of companies, multiple countries, different asset classes, and some of the fastest-growing industries on the planet. Set up automatic contributions, stay consistent, and let time do the rest. If you want a low-cost broker to start investing, check the link in the description. And if you want more portfolio ideas, ETF breakdowns, and wealth-building guides, make sure to subscribe. Your future self at 40, 50, and 60 will thank you for the decisions you make today.